In 2008, a geneticist at the University of Chicago named John Novembre fed 1,387 European DNA samples into an algorithm and asked it a simple question: how do these genomes cluster? No geographic labels, no nationality data, no passports, just raw sequences of adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine, run through a mathematical model that groups similar things together. When the results rendered on screen, Novembre's team went quiet. The algorithm had recreated the map of Europe, not roughly, not approximately. The genetic clusters fell into a pattern that mirrored the geographic continent almost perfectly. Scandinavians in the north, Iberians in the south, Italians to the southeast, the British Isles off to the west. Your genes knew where your great-great-grandparents lived, within about 186 miles, even if you had never been told. That study, published in Nature, didn't just redraw how we think about European ancestry. It proved something that political mapmakers had been getting wrong for centuries, that the real borders between human populations aren't drawn by treaties, wars, or governments. They're drawn by mountains, rivers, deserts, and 10,000 years of who married whom. Political borders have been redrawn hundreds of times across human history. Genetic boundaries have barely moved at all. But here's where it gets strange. When scientists expanded that same analysis to every continent running the 1,000 Genomes Project data, 2,504 individuals from 26 populations, 84.7 million genetic variants, one population broke the pattern entirely. Sitting right inside Europe, surrounded on every side by genetically similar neighbors, was a group whose DNA didn't match anything around it. Not the Spanish to the south, not the French to the north. Not anyone. Their language has no relatives. Their genetic signature has no equivalent. And for 5,000 years, while every population around them was overwritten by one of the most powerful genetic waves in human history, they didn't move and they didn't change. To understand how that's possible, you need to see what genetic boundaries actually are and why your DNA carries a map that no atlas has ever printed. If that question pulls you in, subscribe to Helix Origins. Next week we're testing the oldest DNA ever extracted from every continent. One of them predates our species entirely. That video is already on the channel. Think of your genome as a set of GPS coordinates, except instead of latitude and longitude, the coordinates are written in millions of tiny genetic variants called SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms. Each SNP is one letter in your DNA that differs from the reference sequence. You carry roughly 4 to 5 million of them. Most do nothing. But collectively, they form a pattern, a signature that is unique to the population your ancestors belong to. And when scientists compare those signatures across thousands of people, something remarkable happens. Similar signatures cluster together, different ones separate. And the distances between clusters correspond, almost exactly, to the geographic distances between the populations those people came from. The mathematical tool that makes this visible is called Principal Component Analysis, PCA. Here's how to think about it. Imagine you're standing in a room full of people, and you can't see anyone, but you can hear every conversation. PCA is the algorithm that listens to all the conversations at once and figures out who is standing near whom based only on what they're saying and how they're saying it. Applied to genetics, PCA takes millions of SNPs from thousands of individuals and compresses that ocean of data into a two-dimensional plot where each person is a dot. Dots that are close together share more genetic variants. Dots that are far apart share fewer. And when you plot thousands of those dots, the shape that emerges is a genetic map, a map that has never been drawn by a human hand. The 1,000 Genomes Project, completed in 2015, gave scientists the most detailed version of this map ever created. 2,504 individuals, 26 populations, 84.7 million genetic variants cataloged. The findings confirmed what Novembre's European study had shown on a smaller scale. Genetic boundaries between populations are real, measurable, and ancient, but they almost never follow political borders. They follow geography, mountain ranges, ocean straits, deserts, river systems, and they follow time. A border that has existed for 10,000 years of geographic separation carries far more genetic weight than a national boundary drawn 200 years ago. Your passport says one thing. Your genome says something older, something deeper, and something far more precise. Now let's walk this genetic map, continent by continent, and watch the borders disagree with every atlas you've ever trusted. Let's start with the continent. We have the most genetic data for Europe. And the first thing you need to understand is that Europe has no hard genetic borders. None. Not between France and Germany. Not between Spain and Portugal. Not between Poland and Ukraine. What Europe has are gradients, slow, continuous shifts in allele frequency that change as you move across geography. A person from southern France is genetically a little more like a northern Spaniard than like someone from northern France. A person from western Poland is genetically closer to someone from eastern Germany than to someone from eastern Poland. The borders on the map say these people are different nationalities. Their DNA says they're genetic neighbors who happen to carry different passports. Novembre's 2008 study proved this with extraordinary precision. When he plotted those 1,387 European genomes on a PCA chart, the first principal component, the axis that captures the most genetic variation, ran north to south. The second ran east to west. Overlay that PCA plot on a geographic map of Europe, rotate it slightly, and the match is almost 1-to-1. A Swiss person plots in the center. A Finn plots in the northeast corner. An Italian plots in the south. A geneticist who has never seen your face or heard your accent can tell whether your ancestors came from northern or southern Italy just from your DNA. That's how tightly genetics tracks geography in this continent. But here's where it gets strange. There is one exception, one population that breaks the European gradient completely, and we'll get to them. First, look at what happens when you move northeast on the map. The Finns. On paper, Finland is a Scandinavian country. Finnish people look Scandinavian, live in Scandinavia, and share a border with Sweden. But genetically, Finns are not Scandinavian. They cluster separately from every other Northern European population. The reason is linguistic and ancient. Finnish belongs to the Uralic language family, not the Indo-European family that covers virtually every other European language from Portuguese to Russian. And that linguistic divide maps directly onto a genetic one. The ancestors of modern Finns arrived from a different migration wave, one that brought Uralic-speaking populations from the east roughly 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. They mixed with existing Scandinavian populations but retained enough of their original genetic signature to still stand apart. A language family boundary became a genetic boundary, and it has held for 3,000 years. If your ancestry traces to Finland, or to the Baltic states, or to anywhere east of Scandinavia, drop that in the comments. I want to know how many of you are carrying the Uralic signal. Now let's cross the Mediterranean and see if the same rules hold on the continent where humans have been the longest. Here's a fact that reshapes everything. Two individuals from different ethnic groups in sub-Saharan Africa can be more genetically different from each other than a Norwegian person is from a Japanese person. Read that again. The genetic distance between a Yoruba individual from Nigeria and a San individual from Botswana is larger than the genetic distance between populations separated by about 5,000 miles of land and ocean on opposite sides of Eurasia. Every genetic boundary in Europe, every gradient from Scandinavia to Sicily, fits inside the range of variation that exists within a single continent, Africa. The reason is time. Modern humans have lived in Africa for at least 300,000 years. Every other continent was populated within the last 70,000. That means African populations have had 4 to 5 times longer to accumulate genetic differences from each other. And those differences run deep. In 2009, Sarah Tishkoff and her team at the University of Pennsylvania published the most comprehensive genetic mapping of African diversity ever conducted. 121 African populations, over 3,000 individuals, analyzed for 1,327 genetic markers. The study, published in Science, identified 14 ancestral population clusters within Africa alone. 14. Europe, by comparison, is essentially one ancestral cluster with internal gradients. Africa is a continent of continents. Walk the genetic map. West Africa carries the signature of the Bantu expansion, one of the largest demographic events in human history. Starting roughly 3,000 to 5,000 years ago from the Nigeria-Cameroon border region, Bantu-speaking populations spread south and east across the continent, carrying their agricultural practices, their languages, and their DNA with them. Today, over 300 million people across sub-Saharan Africa speak Bantu-descended languages, and their genetic signature dominates the southern half of the continent. That expansion created genetic boundaries between Bantu-descended populations and the hunter-gatherer groups that preceded them. Some of those boundaries are still visible today. The pygmy populations of Central Africa, for example, carry genetic signatures that diverged from Bantu-speaking neighbors 60,000 years ago, even though they live within the same forests. Move east, and the Nilotic populations of the Nile Valley, the Dinka, the Nuer, the Maasai, carry some of the tallest average heights and most distinct body proportions of any human population, driven by thousands of years of adaptation to open savanna environments. Their genetic boundary with neighboring Bantu populations is one of the sharpest on the continent. Then move south to the Khoisan peoples, the San and Khoi of southern Africa. Their lineage is the deepest in all of humanity. Haplogroup L0, carried predominantly by San populations, represents the oldest surviving maternal lineage in the human species, 100,000 to 200,000 years old. The genetic boundary between the Khoisan and every other human population on Earth is the widest gap in our entire species. It is the original boundary, the one from which every other divergence eventually descended. Africa doesn't just have the most genetic boundaries, it has the oldest, and they predate every political border on the planet by at least 50,000 years. But here's what matters: those boundaries are still there, still measurable, still shaping disease risk, drug response, and adaptation. The deepest genetic borders on Earth aren't between continents, they're within one. Now let's cross into Asia, where the rules hold but one label hides the biggest genetic paradox on the planet. 1.4 billion people, one ethnic classification, Han Chinese. On paper, the Han are a single group, the world's largest ethnic population, unified by language, culture, and thousands of years of continuous civilization. In genetics, that label is a fiction. The Hugo Pan-Asian SNP Consortium, a landmark collaboration published in Science in 2009, involving 73 laboratories across 11 countries, analyzed genetic variation across 1,128 individuals from 73 Asian populations. When the PCA plots rendered, the Han Chinese didn't cluster as one group, they split into two. Northern Han and Southern Han separated on the first principal component, with a genetic distance larger than the distance between many separate European nationalities. A person from Harbin in northern China and a person from Guangzhou in southern China are, genetically, more different from each other than a Frenchman is from a German. But both carry the same ethnic label, speak dialects of the same language family, and check the same box on a census form. The reason is history. The Qinling Mountains and the Huai River have served as a genetic boundary within China for thousands of years, separating northern wheat farming populations from southern rice farming populations. These two groups descend from partially different ancestral migrations. Northern Han carry more ancestry from ancient northern East Asian populations, while Southern Han carry significant admixture from indigenous Southeast Asian lineages that were absorbed during the southward expansion of Chinese civilization. The political border between the two never existed. The genetic border has existed for 8,000 years. But Asia's sharpest genetic boundary isn't horizontal, it's vertical. The Himalayas, the highest mountain range on Earth, create a genetic wall so absolute that populations living just about 93 miles apart on either side carry completely different adaptive signatures. The most dramatic case is the Tibetan EPAS, one gene, a variant that allows Tibetans to thrive at altitudes above about 13,000 feet, where most humans would develop life-threatening altitude sickness. In 2014, A team at the University of California, Berkeley, led by Rasmus Nielsen, discovered something extraordinary about this gene. It didn't evolve in Tibetans at all. It was inherited from Denisovans, an archaic human species that went extinct 50,000 years ago. The Himalayas aren't just a mountain range. They are a 50-million-year-old genetic wall, and on one side of that wall, an extinct species is still keeping people alive. If your ancestry traces to any part of Asia East, South, Southeast, Central, drop that in the comments. Your genetic story is on this map, and it is far older than any dynasty that ever claimed your land. Now, we've walked 3 continents. Europe, gradients that track geography, no hard lines. Africa, the deepest, oldest genetic boundaries on Earth, all within one continent. Asia, political unity masking genetic diversity that dwarfs entire neighboring continents. Everywhere, the same rule holds. Genetic boundaries follow geography and time, not flags and treaties. Mountains make walls, rivers make corridors, deserts make islands, and 10,000 years of marriage does the rest. But here's what the algorithm couldn't explain. Sitting right inside Western Europe, surrounded by genetically similar French and Spanish populations on every side, there is a group whose DNA doesn't fit. Their PCA dot doesn't cluster with the French. It doesn't cluster with the Spanish. It doesn't cluster with anyone. Their language has no relatives. Their Y chromosome distribution has no equivalent. And their genetic signature carries the answer to a question that has haunted European archaeology for a century. What did Europe look like before everything changed? The Basques live in a region spanning northern Spain and southwestern France, roughly 7,700 square miles, home to approximately 2.2 million people. They call their homeland Euskal Herria. They call their language Euskara, and Euskara is the single most unusual language in all of Europe. It has no known relatives, not one. Every other European language, from Icelandic to Greek to Hindi to Russian, belongs to the Indo-European family. Euskara does not. It is not related to Spanish, despite being surrounded by it. It is not related to French, despite bordering it. It is not related to any extinct language we have records for. It is, in the technical term that linguists use when they have exhausted every other option, a language isolate the only one in Europe. Linguists have spent 2 centuries trying to connect Euskara to something. Anything Caucasian languages, Berber, even ancient Sumerian, none of it holds. Euskara stands alone. Now here's why that matters for genetics. In 2019, Inigo Olalde and a team from Harvard's David Reich lab published one of the most comprehensive ancient DNA studies ever conducted on a single region. 271 ancient genomes from the Iberian Peninsula, spanning 8,000 years of history. The study, published in Nature, traced the genetic transformation of Iberia from the Mesolithic through the Bronze Age and found something remarkable about the Basques. Between 2500 and 2000 BCE, a massive genetic turnover hit Iberia. Populations carrying ancestry from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, the Yamnaya, and their descendants swept into the peninsula. Within 500 years, the Y chromosome lineages of Iberian males were almost completely replaced. The old European male lines, the ones carried by the Neolithic farmers who had lived there for 4,000 years, vanished, replaced by a single-step haplogroup, R1b. This happened everywhere in Western Europe: Britain, France, Germany, the Netherlands. The Yamnaya replacement was continent-wide. In some regions, male line replacement reached 90% or higher. The cultural consequences were total new languages, new burial practices, new social structures. The Indo-European world was born, but the Basques held. Their Y chromosome lineages show the same R1b haplogroup, meaning Yamnaya men did enter the Basque region, but their autosomal DNA tells a different story. The Basques retained a higher proportion of pre-Yamnaya Neolithic farmer ancestry than any other surviving Western European population. They are, genetically, what all of Western Europe looked like before the steppe migration rewrote the continent's DNA. The farmer ancestry that was diluted to 30 to 40% in France, Germany, and Britain still runs above 70% in Basque populations. Their language survived because their population structure survived. They were not overrun. They absorbed the newcomers on their own terms. The Basques didn't move to Europe. They were already there when Europe moved around them. And for 5,000 years, while empires rose and fell, while the Roman legions marched, while the Moors conquered Iberia, while Napoleon redrew the map of Europe, they stayed. Same valleys, same mountains, same language that no invader ever managed to replace. But this isn't just an interesting footnote about a small population in the Pyrenees. What the Basque anomaly reveals, and what the genetic boundary maps of 3 continents confirm, is something that rewrites how we think about human identity entirely. Genetic boundaries predict disease risk better than national borders do. A Finnish person and a Swedish person may live about 62 miles apart, share a currency, and cheer for the same Nordic sports teams. But a doctor prescribing medication based on Northern European ancestry is making a mistake, because Finnish populations carry a unique set of disease variants driven by their Uralic founder effect that Swedish populations do not share. The genetic boundary between them matters more than the political proximity. In Finland, a rare disease called congenital nephrotic syndrome, which causes kidney failure in infants, occurs at rates 10 times higher than anywhere else in Europe. The reason is the same reason Finland sits apart on the PCA chart. A small founding population, 3,000 years of relative isolation, and the relentless mathematics of genetic drift. The border on the map says Sweden and Finland are neighbors. The genes say they've been separated longer than most European nations have existed. This pattern repeats globally. Ashkenazi Jewish populations carry elevated risk for Tay-Sachs disease, BRCA mutations, and Gaucher disease, all consequences of a medieval founder bottleneck that created a genetic boundary within a population that shares geography with surrounding Europeans, but not ancestry. A doctor in New York City who treats all European-descended patients identically is ignoring a genetic boundary that matters more than any ocean. But here's the second implication, and this one cuts deeper. Those genetic boundaries, the ones that have held for 5,000, 10,000, 50,000 years, are collapsing. Right now, faster than at any point in human history. Modern transportation, urbanization, and global migration are dissolving genetic boundaries that survived the Bronze Age, survived the Roman Empire, survived the Mongol conquests, survived colonialism. In 2015, a study from the University of Oxford analyzing genetic data from the UK Biobank found that the average distance between an individual's birthplace and their partner's birthplace has increased tenfold since 1900. The genetic gradients that Novembre mapped in 2008, the ones that perfectly mirrored European geography, are blurring in real time. In 3 generations, boundaries that took 10,000 years to form are becoming undetectable. Race is a social construct with no clean biological mapping, but population genetics is real. These are stories of migration, adaptation, and survival, not hierarchy. The genetic boundaries we've mapped today are records of who moved, who stayed, who mixed, and who didn't, written in a language that doesn't care about politics, doesn't recognize ideology, and cannot be rewritten by decree. And here's the uncomfortable final question. The Basques survived because they stayed still. Their genetic boundary held because the Pyrenees shielded them, and their population was large enough to absorb incoming genes without being overwritten. But in a world where no mountain range stops a Boeing 787, and no valley is more than 24 hours from any other valley on Earth, what happens to the last genetic boundaries? Are they preserved? Or are they, like the political borders before them, just lines waiting to be redrawn? What do you think happens to genetic boundaries 200 years from now, when every human population on Earth has been mixing at rates that would have been unimaginable even 100 years ago? Drop your take below. Here is what 3 continents of data tell us, reduced to a single truth. Every political border on Earth is temporary. Genetic borders are not permanent either, but they are patient. They outlast empires. They outlast languages. They outlast every flag ever sown and every treaty ever signed. The Roman Empire lasted 500 years. The Basque genetic boundary has lasted 5,000. The Quaison divergence has lasted 100,000. The borders drawn by mountains and time move so slowly that they feel permanent until they don't. The Basques survived because they didn't move. That is their paradox and their gift to genetics, a living snapshot of an older Europe, preserved in the DNA of a population that said no to every wave that tried to wash them away, not by fighting, not by fleeing, by staying, by marrying within their valleys, by speaking a language so different that no outsider ever learned it well enough to replace it. The rest of Europe was rewritten. They were the original manuscript. But the irony is this: the very thing that makes the Basques genetically extraordinary is the thing that modern humanity has stopped doing. Stillness, geographic loyalty over generations, marriage within walking distance. Those patterns created every genetic boundary on the planet, and those patterns are ending. Not because of war or conquest, because of choice. Because a person born in Bilbao now lives in Berlin. Because a person born in Lagos now lives in London. Because the mountains that shaped our genomes for 10,000 years are, for the first time in human history, irrelevant to where we live, who we meet, and who we marry. We spent 10,000 years drawing lines on maps. Our DNA spent 10,000 years ignoring them. And now, for the first time, our DNA and our maps are finally starting to agree because the lines are disappearing from both. If this changed how you see the borders around you, subscribe to Helix Origins. We go where the textbooks end and the genomes begin. Next week, we tested the oldest DNA ever extracted from every continent on Earth. One of them predates our species entirely. That video is already on the channel.